to Commission Ed, the Air Force Officer Podcast. Here we explore the training and development of America's leaders in the application of air power and the profession of arms. The views expressed are those of the hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position of the United States Air Force, Department of Defense, or the U.S. government. The mention of companies by name is solely for the purpose of discussion and should not be implied as endorsement.
Welcome back to another episode of Commission Ed, the Air Force Officer Podcast. I'm Colin Slade.
And I'm Reed Gann, and we're your hosts for Commission Ed. Colin, welcome to season 2, or 3. This is season 3. Sorry.
This is year 3.
I'm sleep deprived. Okay, let's rewind this. Steve, we're going to start over.
No. This is going into the show.
This is going into the show? Awesome. Okay. Welcome to year 3, season 3 of the Commission Ed podcast. We're going to start a series of episodes on kind of a big topic that, Colin, you and I are wholly unqualified to comment on.
Mm-hmm.
But
we're going to do it anyway.
But we've got to. To. The more we've started to explore this idea of what is a commission, kind of, I don't know, Commission Ed, it's like the point of what we're talking about.
Yep.
It's all started kind of to crystallize around this idea of the centrality of command. So today we're going to do kind of the nuts and bolts about what is a commander. So in typical form, we'll go through some AFIs, go through some, US code, that kind of stuff. Really riveting. But we'll also talk a little bit about, kind of the unstated things, our experiences, things we've observed, because we've all been around commanders. They're a critical part of an Air Force or military experience. So let's get to it. So Colin, when we think of commanders, what is a commander?
Yeah. So there are a number of different types of commanders that it's usually prefaced by some sort of echelon, some sort of designator of where that command exists within the Air Force. So when we talk commander, we typically think of squadron commander. That's usually where people's minds will go when you say my commander, right?
Yeah, the beating heart of the Air Force. That's the central unit, the central organization.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it makes sense because squadrons are how the Air Force is organized. That's how missions are carried out. They're done at the squadron level, right?
Yeah.
And so it makes sense that squadron commander is the typical place that your mind will go when you hear that word. But there are many more positions that use the title of commander. And I'm just going to run through a quick list here to give you an idea of how many other types of commanders there are. Flight commander, detachment commander, squadron commander, group commander, wing and vice wing commanders, installation commanders, numbered Air Force commanders, MAJCOM commanders, and combatant commanders. So we see there the entire Department of the Air Force, but outside of it, in the combatant commands, the COCOMs, where command takes place, where Air Force officers are going to be functioning as a commander.
Yeah. And this all makes sense, right? Chain of command starts at the commander-in-chief, right? There's that word again, and goes, this is how the power and authority comes to you. It comes through this chain. Some other positions that function like commanders and may even have some of the responsibilities but don't have the title. You have commandants, you have adjutant generals, you have materiel leaders, that's in the acquisitions world, chiefs, and directors.
Yeah, chiefs. Can we talk about that one real quick?
Yeah, let's do that.
Because we're not talking about chief master sergeants, right? We're talking about...
Or the Navy rank of chief either.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chief often is used to designate someone who has a responsibility over some sort of part of a unit. So like think flight chief or branch chief or something like that, right?
Yeah. Section chief.
And also chief of staff, right?
Exactly.
The chief of staff of the Air Force, that certainly is a command position, but he's not called a commander.
Yeah. So all of these ways, this idea of a commander, there's this idea of like central figure in a position of power and authority in charge.
Yeah.
At all levels. So I'm impressed that you did this math, Colin. Well done. There are 780 command coded billets in the regular Air Force.
I didn't do the math. Google did it for me.
Okay. Well, good job, Google.
But I'll take the credit. Thank you, Reed.
Yeah, there you go. So this only includes positions that are boarded. And we'll do an episode about how commanders are selected and kind of what goes into that, to include some of the unwritten rules about how, if you want to be a commander, you kind of got to do X, Y, and Z. And it also does not include any positions in the reserve components or flight command, because flight command is not a boarded position. Honestly, it's just kind of, you could be a flight commander as a young second lieutenant, and it's just the assignment that AFPC decided to give you.
Right. Which is very interesting because that's not how it's done in the Army and the Marines. Maybe the Navy, I don't know that much about how command time as a CGO works for the Navy, but definitely in the Army and the Marines, company commanders are boarded positions. They are command coded billets. They are given G series orders, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So same grade, same pay structure, same, rank title even, we're all called captains at 03 in the Army, Marines, and in the Air Force. But those positions of company commanders are treated very differently from us in the Air Force as flight commanders.
Yeah, totally different. They're almost more equivalent to a squadron commander as an 03 in those specific positions. Okay, so that's kind of the big hand, small map. What is a commander? Let's start getting into some of the actual rules. And there's surprisingly few.
Right.
Yeah, this is one of those, like, with the centrality of this position, one would think there'd be a little bit more written down, I guess. But I will say the things that are written down in important places.
Right. Yep.
So, Colin, why don't you kick us off with kind of like the first thing about commanders that we find in the guidance?
Yeah. So when you look for what the minimum requirements are to be a commander, you're not going to find much. What we did find was in Title 10, U.S. Code Section 8074.
That's a deep cut, by the way. That's like, that's deep in the guidance.
Yeah. You really have to go looking for it. But once again, thank you, Google. So officers in the Air Force may be assigned to command various different Air Force activities, installations, and personnel based on the echelon or the area where they are going to have responsibility. So just like we ran through at the beginning of the episode, all the way from the highest levels, Major Combatant Command, all the way down to squadrons of flights, right? And to discharge those duties or functions authorized by law, officers are assigned certain duties or powers by the Secretary of the Air Force. Now, the translation of all of this is that in order to carry out those duties, in order to have those responsibilities for installations and personnel, you must be a commissioned officer. Period, end, dot. Right?
Yeah.
So if you want to be a commander, okay, we're talking minimum requirements, thou shalt be a commissioned officer. Right?
Yeah. Pretty straightforward.
Now, there are some nuances that further stipulated in the law here. Now, moving on to another deep cut, Section 8579, it talks about how officers who are in the medical, dental, veterinary, medical service corps, or biomedical, or also nurses, cannot be commanders in areas that are outside of their specific category, which is best just understood as non-line of the Air Force.
Yeah. So what we're getting at here is you're not going to see a nurse as a commander of an ops group. That's not a thing. They would need to be a commander over other medical non-line personnel.
Yeah. And it was really interesting. I always thought that was just like a heuristic, a shortcut, a way of just a more way, the way that we've always done things. It wasn't that they couldn't because of any sort of written down rule. Like that's just the way it was. Turns out it's actually in the law that non-line officers cannot command line of the Air Force units.
Yeah. Now, of note, there isn't a law preventing the other thing from happening.
The vice versa of it.
Yeah. Having a pilot or security forces, or you pick your line of the Air Force being a commander over a medical group or something.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't appear to be there. So,
and that does happen. Not very often, but it does.
Yeah. So when it comes to, the very specifics, like what can you command, it's pretty much wide open for a member of line of the Air Force, much more restrictive for those outside of that. Okay, so if we keep going, there are a few more things that it does talk about in Title 10. This one's 8583. It talks about some qualities and responsibilities a little bit, not as much depth as you'd think. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But in order to be a commanding officer, you need to show yourself as a good example of virtue, honor, patriotism, and this one's interesting, subordination.
Yeah.
When I think of a commander, subordinate is not a word that comes to mind.
Right.
It's kind of the opposite of that.
Yeah. I mean, I fully understand and get behind being a good example of virtue, honor, and patriotism. Got it. Check. I like those ones. But being a good example of subordination,
it took me by surprise. And I think we'll talk about it in a little bit here, but I thought that was interesting. So put a pin in that one and we'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
Another one, vigilant in inspecting the conduct of all persons who are placed under their command.
So they are responsible for making sure that the people in their area of responsibility, within their unit, within their command, are conducting themselves the way that they're supposed to. And the next point there, number 3, kind of feeds into that they are supposed to guard against and suppress all dissolute and immoral practices, and to correct any sort of infractions against the laws and regulations of the Air Force. And this gets into the G series orders that commanders carry. And we'll explain that here in a little bit too. But it's just important to see that it's outlined here in law that commanders must inspect the actions that their people are carrying out on behalf of the unit.
Yeah. And then correct them if they need to.
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing here in this section, take necessary and proper measures under the law, regulations, customs of the Air Force to promote, safeguard the morale, physical well-being, and general welfare of the persons under their charge or command. So they got to take care of their folks.
Yeah.
I think it's time, though, to kind of talk about this idea of G-series orders. We've mentioned this word a few times, but in order to fulfill these things we just talked about, right, inspect and correct according to law,
mm-hmm.
Commanders are a little bit different. They have a few things that your normal run-of-the-mill doesn't have available to them.
And I would add also, to be the example of subordination, I think the G series plays a role in that too.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to start by defining what G series orders are. So you can find this in AFI 38 TAC 101. G series orders are used to announce and record command secession. So it's literally just, this person is now the commander.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it says.
Yeah.
What goes along with that is they now have been identified as someone who can exercise legal authority granted to them based on this role. Okay, so what is this legal authority? Well, what the legal authority that commanders have that normal, quote unquote, normal officers don't have.
Non-commander officers.
Yep. Is they can issue non-judicial punishment. Non-judicial punishment is exactly what it sounds like. There has not been a judge or a trial, and you can get punished according as they see fit within the bounds of the law, of course.
Yeah.
So what does that look like? That looks like you can get fined based on a percentage of your pay. You can lose rank. You can be confined. Like they can make you go somewhere, like they confine you to quarters, like you can't leave your room. Admonition, reprimands, they can give you extra duties and otherwise restrict your movements or what you do. So they can like punish you.
Mm-hmm. We keep saying you, but I don't want people that are listening thinking, hey, watch yourself because commanders are going to be coming after you. This is for those people we mentioned earlier, those that are infracting on the laws and regulations of the Air Force, and the commander has the responsibility to correct them. It's written in the law that the commander will correct those people. And it's this non-judicial punishment, these different ways of correcting, that they're able to do that.
Yeah.
So it's not you, audience, that are in the wrong.
Yes.
But that's what commanders can do.
Yeah. And we're not going to keep going on this point, right? This is not a discussion about good order and discipline and all the tools available to commanders and, you know, the the spectrum of discipline and punishment.
Though is a worthy conversation to have. It's just not
Yes.
one that we're going to do right now.
Yeah, we will do that one because that is a super crucial discussion. But in order for a commander to do all those things we've discussed, they have to have additional tools available to them.
Yeah.
And these are those tools. And should a member decide not to accept this non-judicial punishment, if they think that the commander is wrong and that have not done anything wrong, then it goes to a court-martial, and that's a trial, and that involves lawyers, and that's a whole separate thing. And that's not what we're talking about with, commander's responsibilities.
Yeah.
But yeah, so when you hear G series orders, it's literally a form, Air Force Form 35, that says so-and-so's the commander. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
And there's a whole AFI that goes into, it's pretty interesting, but that's what it means. It means this person has been given the legal authority to conduct NJP or non-judicial punishment. You may hear it called an Article 15. That's just a portion of the UCMJ that allows commanders to do this.
Right. Yeah. And we bring this up because we want to make it clear that these are the things that designate a commander as someone who is different from a non-commander officer. We all have a commission, right? We have all been granted authority, that special trust and confidence by virtue of meeting the minimum requirements of the Air Force as outlined in Title 10, Section 532, right? But they've been through another sort of process or selection that moves them into a different category of officer than everybody else. They've been through a board. They've been identified by the powers that be within the Air Force. They've been given G series orders that designates them as the commander. So that is important when you see, two 06s standing side by side with birds on their shoulder, but one of them has the command pin above their name tag, right? That says this one's the wing commander and this one's not. That matters.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And just think about the concept. You can take someone's rank away.
Mm-hmm.
You can confine them. You can dock their pay. You have legal power and authority, and that's heavy. It's heavy stuff. And yet, Colin, as we talked about, there's not a whole lot of how to.
Right.
There's not there. So, we've talked about this before. AFI 1 TAC 2, right? Commander's responsibilities: accomplish the mission, lead airmen, manage resources, improve the unit. Nowhere in there does it say, what do you do when your airman gets a DUI?
Right.
Yeah. Now, they're not going to abandon you. There are people to help and guide you and to lead you through this process. There are squadron commanders courses. There are all these books, Commanders in the Law. You see those in most commanders' offices, very well eared and, thumbed through. They're using those quite a bit. Legal is there to help you. PA is there to help you. There are resources out there. But one of the things that I think is interesting, one of the reasons there isn't an AFI on, quote, how to command, is if you read the front pages of an AFI, there's almost always a section for commanders at every level, what they're responsible for.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there's not one AFI because you have all of them.
Yeah, it's all AFIs.
It's every single one.
Which is not us saying go read every single one, but more like just pay attention to the front matter of the AFI when you open it up. Don't just skip over it, especially if you are in a command position, because therein is your responsibility.
Yeah. And there's going to be something in there that says, local commanders or squadron commanders. And you may have stuff you got to do. Yeah. Super interesting how there isn't one location because it's all of it.
Yeah.
So no pressure. You'll be fine.
Oh, man. Good stuff. Okay, Reed, we've gotten really pedantic, as is our usual, about what is a commander and the things that are actually written down. But let's move more into the ethereal, the unstated things, the unwritten about what commanders are, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So as we were prepping for this episode, I just started thinking back about every commander I've ever had. And at, 10 years in, I've had a few.
You've had a few, yeah.
I had a few because at every position, you're going to have the equivalent of squadron, group, wing, and it goes up. You have a lot. And some you interact with more or less. And as I ran through the Rolodex, there are some things that kind of stuck out that seem to be trends that I thought would be good to discuss. And the first one is kind of more of just an interesting observation. I've only ever had one female squadron commander. And I've also only had one other female commander.
At any level?
At any level. And that was a component commander at PACAF. So the 4-star commander of PACAF, General Lori Robinson, amazing human being, went on to be the geographic combatant commander over NORTHCOM, first ever female. But that's it.
And you've been in for over 10 years now.
Yeah. When I think commander, I think of a man. And I'm not making a judgment call on that, except that I think that's probably not the right ratio.
Right.
But that's kind of what I think about. Now, I've had vice wing commanders. I've had tons of supervisors, flight commanders, peers, but only one squadron commander. And that squadron commander was only for 8 weeks. And I was basically on loan to that squadron. I was asked to finish out my OTS time by pulling one more flight, which was an awesome experience. And the student squadron that I was assisting had a female commander. She was great. Really enjoyed working for her. But that's just something that kind of stuck out. Colin, what about you? Have you had female commanders?
Yes, I have. But Reed, your experience is not unique. So let me just share mine real quick. For the last year, have had a female squadron commander for the 8th Swiss. She is moving on from the squadron. I'm getting a new squadron commander here in the next week and a half, who is a male. But my experience with my current commander is that it was in a reserve squadron where both she and I are traditional reservists. And so my interactions with her have been very limited, right?
Yeah.
And, fantastic human as far as I've gotten to know her. But because I'm a TR, she's a TR, and also because #COVID, my interactions have been very limited. Also, like you, I had a senior level female commander who was the commander of the Air Force District of Washington. So she was a 2-star. And, I had some interactions with her, but this was right when I came into the Air Force. I was a brand new second lieutenant. And, by the time that I really had my bearings and understood what was going on, she had moved on to a new position. And, since that time, I have not had very many. I have not even seen very many female squadron commanders.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't want to, put too much, reasoning into why that might be. But if we take a look at our second thought here on what commanders are, it's that they are busy and wildly so.
Yeah. It's almost unnatural.
Yeah. And if you just think about like the demands on female officers, especially those that then later become mothers, it just feels like the demands on their time, their attention, their resources as a commander and as a wife or mother back at home, that they just feel incompatible. Now, I have absolutely every faith and confidence that there are women out there who are able to be both a squadron commander and a mother and do both very well.
Yeah.
I'm certain that happens. I just haven't seen it very often.
Yeah. And I wonder if because it's not seen very often, if that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in some form or regard. I know this is something our leadership is looking at. They've talked about it.
Yeah.
I want to be a part of that solution. I said earlier that I wasn't making a judgment call about this. It was just an observation. I am making a judgment call. I think we need more women in command.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I'm eager to see how this develops. But like you, if you don't see it, that's what you start to think is a commander.
Yeah.
And so that was just something that I thought, was worth talking about. And I don't have an answer to this. I think there are way, way bigger issues that underlie this that you brought up, right? And those types of topics and issues are not something that is only part of the Air Force. Reporting recently has shown that women lost more jobs during COVID than men because of childcare responsibilities. These are way bigger issues than just affecting the DoD. So, but just an interesting thing. And we'll leave that there and go back to point number 2. Yes, commanders are busy. That is universal. if you see a relaxed commander, it almost makes me nervous.
Right?
Because it's like, oh man, I bet that place is a dumpster fire. Like something's probably wrong. It's so uncommon. Now you have ROTC may be an exception just because of the different ops tempo, or why did you have that written down here?
Yeah, just because, they often send, senior officers to Air Force ROTC as detachment commanders for their final tour because that's a good place for them to end. I don't want to say that it's not high stakes, but it certainly is not high pressure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that would be my one caveat that I've seen among commanders is that ROTC is the one place where a commander can somewhat relax.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. And that's a good transition to our next point that I have found to be true is the more time I spend with commanders, the more I'm close to their day-to-day operations, the more I realize that they are dealing with a mountain of insanity. They are dealing with so much crazy crap. It's unreal. And unless you spend a lot of time close to them, maybe as an exec or in a, somewhat related leadership position, or you're in, like you're close to the command team or whatever. Yeah. Unless you are in that type of position, you just have no clue the craziness they're dealing with daily.
And as you were saying this, Reed, I had the thought that maybe that's why there are so few like AFIs specific to command, because there's no way that you can encapsulate all the crazy that every commander is going to have to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. But I think that's why they're so busy, is because this is just not written down. There is no book.
And let's give some examples of what kind of crazy we're talking about. You mentioned one earlier. What do you do with an airman who gets rolled up for a DUI?
Yeah. Now, I don't want to say that that's almost pedestrian, but that one is actually pretty vanilla. You're going to be able to turn to your now senior enlisted leader. That's going to be the name of the position instead of the superintendent. Your chief, you're going to be able to talk to the shirt, talk to JA, and they're going to have like script.
Yeah.
Now it gets different because all of the circumstances are different, right? And you have to balance, well, what did we do last time? What would I do in the future? Is this a super trooper who just made a dumb mistake? Or is this like the 7th time this guy or gal has done something dumb? And so there is a lot that goes into it. Let's take COVID.
Yeah.
How many commanders had plans?
No script for that.
Yeah, right? Oh, yeah, you wanted to do a book club? Nope. Barbecue? Nope. Professional development? Nope. You just wanted to see another human being from your squadron in person? Nope. Like, yeah, I mean, how do you prepare for that?
But at the same time, that was exactly the point where General Goldfein was like, listen up, commanders. This is what we have chosen you for.
Yeah.
Now is the time to lead.
Yes. Totally agree. Totally agree. But yeah, I bring this up because the more time I spend around commanders, the more empathy I have for them. And the more I'm like, man, we should cut these folks a little bit of slack. Their life is kind of lousy. At least a little bit.
But at the same time, and this gets to our next point, Reed, is that not all commanders are of the same caliber. It's hit or miss, right? That over the course of a career, at any amount of time that you spend in the Air Force, you're going to interact with some really awesome commanders. And you're also going to find the bottom of the barrel where they're not good at command. They may be wonderful humans. They may be terrible humans, but they're just not good at commanding.
Yeah. And I've had the gamut, right? I will say the number of really bad commanders is a lot lower than the generally good.
Right.
If I had to put, where is the mean on my scale, it's definitely on the better than crappy part of the scale.
Yeah. You hope by the time that they have gotten to the point where they're going to be selected as commander, the chaff has burned away. They've separated or were just not selected. But, some will slip through the cracks and get into command positions, even though they're not ready for command.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting. They're human beings too. And sometimes that shows.
Right. And sometimes you wonder, how is this person a human? Because they are so incredible. They're able to take all of that crazy that's coming at them all the time and just handle it with aplomb and just keep going.
Yeah.
You wonder, how are these people even functioning?
Yeah. There have been those moments, right? We've all worked for those folks. Another thing that I think we ought to talk about is they are so incredibly responsible for the culture of their organization that they lead.
Wait. You said culture, not the mission, not operations.
Yeah. They don't own that.
Okay, keep going.
Let's just dispel that myth right now. So they are responsible for the culture, for the way people interact with each other, the feeling, the atmosphere, the camaraderie, just how people feel in that place when they are working together. Yes, they drive the mission. Yes, they make decisions. But man, so much of that is not up to you.
Right.
So much of that is not up to you. Yeah, so you're going to be in charge of this squadron. Guess what? Congress has decided they're going to no longer invest in that platform, and you need to close this squadron down. Not up to you, right? You have zero power to change that. But what you do have power over is how you make that happen. Are you going to shake your fist at the sky and be a, super grumpy person the whole time that you're closing this organization down? Or are you going to honor the heritage and experience of the airmen who came before you and look toward the future? And, that's what I'm talking about. You have so much power to influence the culture of your organization.
Yeah, I like how you explained it.
Yeah, but just not a whole lot over what you are asked to deal with. Your budget. You may enter into a fiscally constrained environment and be dead broke and be shaking trees all over the globe trying to find a couple $100,000 so you can hire a contractor.
Or go back to COVID.
Yeah.
Physically constrained environment.
Yeah.
Where you want to get everybody together, but you can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet you still are responsible for how people interact, how they feel about their job, how they perform, because you are the commander.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Because that is very much not written into AFI 1 TAC 2, right? It says nothing about culture in there. I mean, you could read into it inside the lead airman aspect, but yeah, I can see exactly why you would say that they are unbelievably responsible for the culture of the organization.
Well, and this is especially visible around changes of command. It can be incredibly stark, night and day difference over the period of 48 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have had commanders, they were generally not great, that when they left, the whole organization sighed a breath of relief and then changed as the new leadership took over.
Yeah.
And you had no idea the ominous feeling that was just permeating the organization until that person left. And you thought, wow.
Yeah.
One person did that. One person created a culture where everyone was afraid to go to their leadership with problems. And we get one new person and someone says, oh, sir or ma'am, I've got this issue. And they're like, oh, okay. Well, what should we do about that? And everyone's like, what? So it's up to you. It's up to you. So I just think that's a really interesting thing and something that's been a part of my experience.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit further. So the commander obviously is the top of the command structure for that unit, right?
Yeah.
They are think of them as a figurehead. They're the person at the top. And if we go back to what it says in Title 10, where they're supposed to be that good example of virtue, honor, and patriotism and subordination, right?
Yeah.
We see them being set up to represent this ideal that everybody is looking to them, and that's what they're supposed to follow, right? And the commander is supposed to maintain that, lack for a better word, perfect ideal for the duration of their tour, which is going to be 2 to 3 years long. I mean, no wonder that they're going to have this impact, this cultural effect on the organization, right?
Yeah. And then compound that with what we've already discussed, they are almost powerless to stop or steer the inertia of the Air Force above them.
Oof.
So no wonder they're a little harried, a little busy, like, and we've used COVID, and that's almost like it's a crazy example, but think of another one. I was headed to the KAOC, and we were shutting down Afghanistan in 2014. That's what we were doing, stopping combat operations.
Okay.
I did my whole entire tour on Iraq because ISIS decided the enemy got a vote.
Yeah.
And so everything that we had built, everything we had planned, everything we were prepared for did not happen. And so when the commander-in-chief said, "Thou shalt go into Syria and conduct operations," we saluted smartly and made it happen with half the manning that we needed to do that. Those commanders, they did not get to pick that.
Right.
So yes, they're, quote, in charge, but are they really?
They're in charge of their area of responsibility, their unit.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, there is such a thing as leading up, but the Air Force is so big.
Yeah.
And carries such inertia that we can't expect our commanders really at any level. I mean, maybe at the chief of staff level, we'll see how things play out with General Brown and the accelerate, change or lose. I hope he wins, right? I want this to happen. But at the same time, the inertia of the Air Force is so strong, especially when you're at the lowest level of the Air Force at the squadron. You're trying to affect change potentially at the group, at the wing, at the numbered Air Force, the MAGCOM, the combatant command, the entire Air Force. And you can't expect a lowly, quote, lowly 05 lieutenant colonel to be the one to do that.
Yeah.
So I like what you said earlier. Let's cut them a little bit of slack.
Yeah.
Yes, hold them to the standard because it's written into law that they're supposed to be this example of virtue and honor and patriotism, subordination, but give them a little bit of slack because there's only so much that they can do.
Yeah. I think that's a good transition point to something that, I don't know, I'd like your thoughts on this. I think that command looks very lonely.
Oh, 100%.
Unless they are in an organization that has a lot of other commanders at their rank and position. So I'm in an organization with 18 squadrons.
Okay.
18 squadrons, 1805 squadron commanders.
Yeah.
They've got a peer group.
Yeah.
That's not very common, to be honest.
Well,
the installations might have commanders.
Yeah, but at the day-to-day, at the squadron, they don't have a peer group.
Yeah.
They are by themselves. They are the commander. They're not a commander of the squadron. They're the commander. And this makes me think of one of my most poignant and earliest memories of coming into the Air Force. This must have been like my first or second PT session, unit PT with the squadron. And in walks the commander. We haven't formed up or done anything yet. It's still pretty informal. And he's going around talking to people, being social as any commander should, right? And I'm watching these interactions take place. And I think to myself, that looks like a lonely job.
Mm-hmm.
And I have zero experience in the Air Force at this point. I barely have had any conversations with the commander at this point. And yet I can see it. I can feel it. I can read it. That those interactions, while they may be authentic, are also very distant.
Yeah.
Right? It's lonely at the top. That's what I was thinking the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And at the same time, and I think this kind of leads us into our final point, which is kind of the kickoff for the reason why we're doing this whole series on command.
Yeah.
We have been told, and we're not going to make a judgment call here and now. That's what this next season is going to be about, right? Is talking about this idea. We have been told that this is what all officers should aspire to be. It's in our joint pubs. It's in our AFIs. It's in the way people talk. It's the way we give them parking spots. It's in everything that we do. Feels like officers are being told, this is what you should aspire to be, is a commander. You hear phrases like, there is no such thing as a bad command position. Any command is good.
Mm-hmm.
you hear senior leaders say, oh, my best job in the Air Force was a squadron commander. And yes, we are leaders, right? And this is the definition of leading. You actually have the power and authority to lead and affect change at an organization. But we've just given a bunch of reasons why I'm not really sure. or maybe the way it's constructed right now makes it, this is a hard call. And so, Colin, you and I, here we are, 10-year point or so. And this is something we're staring in the face when it comes to decisions.
Well, yeah. And I've stated publicly on this podcast that I'm not sure that I want to be a commander.
And that's almost
now, do you
sacrilege.
understand why?
Yeah. Oh, no. I was there, Colin. I'm just, because it's almost not allowed to say that out loud. You're almost not allowed to say that.
Right.
And I think that's something that we intend to explore this season, is to ask those questions, because, Colin, if we want anything, we want airmen to make good decisions. We want them to choose what success looks like. We want them to achieve their success. And so this is part of it.
Well, and thank you, Reed, for being altruistic about it. But I personally am not feeling that right now. I'm doing this because I want to make a decision. I want to be informed so I can decide whether to put myself on a path to become a squadron commander. It may be too late for me. I don't know that. I think we're going to dig into a lot more of those things over the next few months. But like, I'm in this for me. No offense, audience. I love you all. Thank you for listening. But I'm in this to learn if I personally want to be a commander, because I have not made that decision yet.
And that's what we're hoping to do. And we hope that you, our audience, are asking yourselves that same question. We want you to join us on this journey. I think we've talked about a lot of interesting things, so as you see those commanders and their fancy parking spots and, handing out coins and, shaking hands and
kissing babies and all that.
Yeah, exactly. All that. Just keep in mind, they've got a hard job and a lot of responsibility. And we'll talk about this, I'm sure. Are they being adequately prepared? Do they have the tools? Honestly, with how well some of them are doing, something's going right, because I've had some amazing commanders. And I'm interested in exploring this. We're hoping to bring you some interviews with some commanders, hopefully graduated ones, because as we've described, the ones that are acting are a little busy. And hopefully they've had some space to kind of, debrief themselves about how the command experience went. Anything else, Colin, before we wrap up this week?
I know I just said that I'm in this for me, but thank you all for tuning in, for listening, being here with us, learning with us. And we invite you to join us in the discussion. Find us on social media, on our email address, airforceofficerpodcast@gmail.com. Join us in the Heritage Room, where we're going to discuss these things in more detail between the episodes so that we can all learn together about what it means to be a commander, what it is that we can do to better prepare ourselves to be commanders if that's the direction that we want to go. Please join us for these discussions, because it's the best way that we're all going to learn.
Awesome. That'll do it. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of Commission Ed.